In this video, we look a little more carefully at the notion of risk appetite. Too much risk can be devastating to an organization. For example, it can lead to financial losses and regulatory sanctions. Too little risk can be equally damaging, dulling an enterprise's competitive edge and resulting in missed opportunities. An enterprise's risk appetite determines how far an organization is willing to go with its exposure to risk without adversely affecting the enterprise's performance. An enterprise needs a framework to measure the outer limits of risk that the enterprise is willing to assume. They need to define the upper and lower risk limits for the organization. Let's develop a graphical depiction of a risk appetite. We begin with the enterprise's risk capacity, which is defined as all the risk the enterprise can be exposed to and still survive. Then the enterprise must establish an upper limit on the risk the organization can comfortably afford to take. Likewise, it must establish a lower limit on the risk beyond which the organization cannot comfortably afford to fall. These two limits identify the enterprise's risk appetite as the outermost limits to which the organization is willing to extend the potential for loss in the course of implementing its strategic objectives and business strategy. In the figure, we see this risk appetite designs a desirable target for the enterprise's risk. Notice the enterprise could survive on more or less risk. The appetite is determined by the highest levels of management. To advance this idea, we need to define the organization's risk profile. The risk profile is a prioritized inventory of the most significant risks identified and assessed through the enterprise-level risk assessment process. It is not a complete inventory of all the risks faced by the organization. Let's take a moment or two to understand this graph. We begin on the far left. Here we see the familiar risk capacity and risk appetite with upper and lower risk limits. Notice that an upper and lower trigger have been added to the figure. Notice the new addition, the risk profile. Many enterprise risk management frameworks define risk as the effect of uncertainty on the strategic objectives of the organization. So our focal point here will be on the organization's ability to meet its objectives. The first figure on the left shows an objective under threat. The risk profile is less than the lower risk limit. This organization is not taking enough risk, so corrective action must be taken. Now consider the second figure. This shows an organization operating within its desired risk range. The risk profile is between the upper and lower triggers, right where managers want it to be. The third figure shows another situation with an objective under threat. Here, the risk profile is between the upper trigger and the upper limit. The profile is edging up to the upper limits of the risk appetite. The organization must escalate its risk management to assure the upper limit is not exceeded. In the fourth figure, the risk profile exceeds the upper limit risk. Corrective action must be taken through the escalation of risk management. And at the far right, we see an organization in an unviable position. The risk profile exceeds the risk capacity of the organization, which must enact a recovery plan. An organization's risk appetite is articulated in a risk appetite statement, which determines that organization's risk target. The risk appetite establishes targets for annual activities and day-to-day activities. It is a strategic level concept. Risk tolerance, by contrast, is a tactical risk management concept. Within the scope of a risk appetite, risk tolerance refers to the day-to-day operational thresholds governing an organization's decision-making and execution of actions. Consider the targets shown here, where arrows represent actions. There is little variation, and all actions are on target in the first panel. The second panel shows a lot of variation, without many actions on target. The third panel shows little variation, but performance is consistently off target. The fourth panel shows actions that are entirely ineffective. Only the first panel shows actions consistent with the risk appetite. All other performances require increased risk management based on the risk tolerance. The 3 M's of an effective risk management framework include management, measurement, and monitoring. Let's consider each in turn. A culture of risk management begins with the board of directors. It permeates downward from senior management, and it is inhabited on a daily basis by everyone in the organization. People and processes in each line of business must be consulted and examined to ensure that the elements of the framework accurately reflect the philosophy of the organization as a whole and within each line of business. An organization is one whole made up of many unique parts, which, if not managed collaboratively, may cause a conflict between the risk appetite and the risk tolerances. Measurement. The framework requires a mechanism for setting qualitative or quantitative risk appetite benchmarks that will measure the safety and soundness of the organization relative to the complexity of its structure, its products, and services. Monitoring. The board should regularly receive information from the 3 lines of defense that include lines of business, its risk management team, and any internal audits. The board can challenge management's proposed actions that are not in line with the risk appetite statement. The information exchange, both from the board and back to management, serves as a check and balance for whether the framework is aligned with the business strategy, opportunities, the regulatory environment, and analyzed performance results. The 4 C's of a risk appetite statement include capital, compensation, customers, and compliance. We will consider each of these in turn. Capital is the organization's strategic capital and liquidity plans, both short-term and long-term. They must be taken into consideration as part of formulating the risk appetite statement. Compensation. Good performance is incentivized and poor performance is deterred through compensation. Succession planning and retention of talent to promote the stability of the risk appetite framework is provided for through compensation. Customers. The adopted risk appetite level's impact on customers must be included in the risk appetite statement. That is, the organization's ability to carry out its commitments and obligations to consumers and customers must be accounted for. Compliance. The risk appetite statement must address the impact that the adopted framework will have on the institution's ability to comply with its regulatory requirements. And finally, a risk appetite statement is more than an approved document. To be effective, it is an articulated practice embedded within the organization's culture and its operations at all levels. Examples of risk appetites are found among the course materials and are available on the internet.